So hello everybody and welcome to today's Wine Scholar Guild Live. Absolutely delighted to have you here for this session in which we're going to explore the world of old vines and why they're important to preserve and why winemakers hold a passion for them. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by three wonderful speakers from our core regions at Wine Scholar Guild of France, Spain and Italy. So first of all, we have Elodie Gassiolle from Plaimont in Gascony in France. So Elodie manages the research projects on the indigenous varieties and the viticulture and winology, and is also in charge of vinifications and aging of certain exceptional cuvées like from the pre-phylloxera vines that they have there, which is obviously going to be relevant for this conversation. So welcome to you, Elodie. We have Viviana Malafarina, who's the winemaker at Basilisco in Basilicata down in the south of Italy. Viviana, I think, started as a viticulturalist before moving on to run a winery. And Viviana was responsible for, I gather anyway, responsible for kind of persuading the estate to start bottling the Storico wine, which is from made from these really cool looking ancient Aglianico vines that and she'll tell you more about as we get going. And then finally, Andreas Kubach, Master of Wine and owner of the bodega Bideona, where they make fabulous wine from their historic vineyard parcels in Rioja Alavesa, as well as making a range of wine from unique varieties and vineyards that are at risk of disappearing in various different parts of Spain. So a very warm welcome to the three of you and huge thanks for joining us. So before we get into the discussion, I'd like to invite all three of you to introduce yourselves and your estates, and we have a few slides to get through. So Elodie, perhaps we'll start with you if you're ready, and you can introduce you and Plaimont.
Okay, fine. Hello everybody. So I'm gonna present a bit of Plaimont. So Plaimont is a union of cooperatives. So it's in the southwest of France and more especially in the Gers region. So we are located close to the Pyrenees in the Pyrenean Piedmont. So the climate is composed of mild winters and hot summers, and the annual rainfall around 1,000 millimeters. So we have influence of the Atlantic Ocean and Pyrenees, of course. And for the topography is really different because we have hills and plateau with exposing northeast and southwest, and also with a different terroir with sand, white sand, clay, and a diversity of soil. So for the different appellation, we are on appellation Côte de Gascogne, and also Saint-Mont, Madiran, Pacherennes du Vic-Bilh, and few years ago, Jurançon. To talk about grape varieties. For the white one, we have for the Gascony Colombard, which is a local variety, and also Petit Courbu, Gros Mansin, Petit Mansin, and Aruffiac for the appellation Saint-Mont and also Pacherennes du Vic-Bilh, and Uni Blanc and a bit of Sauvignon for Gascony too. For the red one, we have Tanat and Pinenc, which are local varieties. And the new one introduced in the appellation is Tardif and Mansa Noir. And we have also Cabernet, Franc and Sauvignon, and a bit of Merlot, but just for the Gascony, not in the appellation. Just to focus Saint-Mont, sorry, because it's a main work on the old vines. It's a little appellation because we have 1,200 hectares and 250 wine growers. And And we in the 90s, we did a huge work on preservation of the old vines. And we have around 130 old vines planted before the 17th. And some of them are pre-phylloxeric. We have 2 pre-phylloxeric vines, including one which are an historic monument with a huge diversity of grape variety inside. Sorry. And to develop the ampelographic work, we have a conservatory with 40 different varieties. And to conclude the presentation, we talk about also white vines called Lambrusque in French. It's a rare and protected specimen we care about. And it's the end.
Thanks, Elodie. I feel bad because I've been very strict with our speakers and told them they're only allowed to speak on their estates for 2 or 3 minutes. So thank you for that. By the way, we have full presentation for this, which we can send out to you guys afterwards. It's got a lot more detail than the speakers are going to in this one, but thank you for setting the scene for us, Elodie. I'll just skip through these ones to this one, and then Viviana, would you like to introduce Basilisco as well?
Yes. The winery is called Basilisco, by the way, but I don't mind. It's very frequent in the work. Okay, sorry. Is it okay? Sorry. Is it just a second slower, so I keep going back and forward? Excuse me. Okay, just a little introduction, as Elodie perfectly did, to tell you where we are and what we are. Basilisco is a small winery. We have about altogether 30 hectares, some all between 20 and 40 years old. And there is a specific vineyard called Lo Storico, which is a pre-phylloxera vine that we've been carrying off in the last 15 years. Because we have the chance to be on a volcano. And as you know, volcanic soil, it's been very helpful as any sandy soil to prevent the attack of phylloxera. So Basilisco is lucky enough to have some very old vineyard, and especially this one, which we really love. As I said, we are on a volcanic soil. The volcano is 1,300 meters, and we are about 600 meters on the sea level. And the particularity of this area is that we are south of Italy, but with a very mountain atmosphere. Actually, we were commenting with our colleagues before that it's quite cool here. It's a little fresh at the moment. And we actually are not far from the Adriatic. I mean, it's 60 kilometers and by air. So it's not very close, but it's close enough to have the influence of the mild temperature and weather of the coast. The winery is about 30 years old, and we are organic since 2012, and we care this little sort of boutique winery. We produce about 70,000 bottles with the idea of showing the different expression of this variety that we use, which is Aglianico, is the only variety with the EOC, and it shows in the bottling what are the different expression of Aglianico in the different soils. Because despite the fact that we are on a volcano, the volcanic soils has a very different characteristic in all the area, where it just all the vineyards are in the same village, but they have a very different expression due mostly to the composition of the soil. What we really like has been, first of all, to bottle this Storico, which was not been done before here. We didn't. Everybody has or had anyway, old vines, but they are less and less productive, and so it's been ground up. And what we did is the opposite. We decided to bottle it as a single vineyard in a single bottle. And the idea is to preserve what we have as a winery and as a territory. Here you have a little, sorry, again, a little idea of this landscape. What you see in this picture is the top of the volcano, which is actually the caldera, which has two little lakes that are a park, a natural park with a specific microfauna, which is very rare and unique in Europe. And obviously all the surrounding area are influenced by the presence of the volcano and its soil, despite the volcano has been not working in the last 130,000 years. The historical, the bottle I was talking about, which is the oldest one we have, is over 80 years old. We don't know exactly how old is the vineyard because there was not a register for the viticulture before 1968. But we have witnesses that has been actually living in the volcano because this area is very rich of caves, natural caves dug into the volcanic soil. And people was refugee during the Second World War. And they were already vinificating these vineyards. So that's how we know a little bit more of the story of this volcanic little plot. And it's been since that time cultivated with the Capano style, which is basically the vine that is supported by canes, more or less like all the Mediterranean does, mostly with tomatoes or similar. But here is culturally used also for the vines. It obviously is not comfortable and not economical, but we just really consider this specific vineyard as a little museum of what viticulture used to be in the region. Some more detailed information about the production of this wine is what you can read here, and I think that's it, just as an introduction of the winery.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. And then Andreas, if we move on to yours as well, we can come back to some of these photos perhaps a little bit later on. But Andreas, very different climate, very different terroir in Rioja. So would you like to introduce your estate?
Yes. Hello. Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Andreas Kubach. I'm a Spanish master of wine of German origin. That's the reason for my name and my accent, but I really am Spanish. I've been working in Spain forever. And I'm today talking from Rioja Alavesa, which is one of my big, the region that fascinates me more for many, many years. And what I'm talking from, the winery I'm sitting today, Bideona, is without a doubt the greatest and most exciting project I have tackled in my 25 years in the business. Rioja, I can say it's the most exciting moment and most important moment in Rioja for at least 3 generations. Rioja has never made greater wines than today, and at the same time, it's suffering great challenges on the commercial side. For the first time in a really long time, or maybe in history, Rioja is articulating its diversity, it's starting to understand its territory and making a new generation of wines of site or terroir-driven wines alongside the traditional or more known wines of style, which are defined by the method more than by the origin. So that's the reason for Bideona. Bideona means the right path in Basque, and it's also like a suggestion of my Basque partners. The winery was created in 18, specifically to work with old vineyards in Rioja Alavesa. I have a few pictures just to give you an idea of how it looks. See if this works. I just clicked on it. Yeah, is this? So that's, I don't know. I hope most of you have been to Rioja, but presumably if you have been to Rioja, you have been shown lots of barrels and been taken to some not very good tapas bars, or maybe you are lucky and got some good tapas bars, but very frequently what has been shown to visitors is the cellars and the oak aging process. We are about parcels, so that would be a classical view from old parcels in Rioja Alavesa, or turning around. This is how it looks. It's, you know, of course, where we are, northeast Spain. This is Google Earth, which is coming next. So it's a valley of the Ebro River, protected in the north by the Sierra Cantabria and the south from the Sistema Iberico, Sierra Alemanda. If we zoom into this, you can, there's a bit of a lag, you can see in the middle there is like the Ebro River. It's hard to see, but it's meandering, and you have like those very complex, that big valley, which is quite different from the north of the Ebro and the south of the Ebro. Of course, when you learn about Rioja, when you do the WSET courses also, they talk about Rioja Alavesa, Alta, and Baja, but it's much more complicated than that. Or if you look at this picture, which is zooming more in, you have the Ebro River. Look at the difference in color of soil. So north of the Ebro and south of the Sierra Cantabria, you have limestone. And this is where you have the oldest vineyards of Rioja. This is the parcel land. This is a region which has thousands of small parcels. So this is the classical way Rioja is taught, which I think is outdated. We have to talk more about the soil differences and about the different aspects of Rioja, limestone to the north, and then those villages, which are the most famous villages of the Son Sierra, that area between the Ebro River and the Sierra Cantabria. So villages like Samaniego, Villabuena, where our winery is, El Ciego, La Guardia, names I hope you will know or get to know as we move forward and develop terroir-driven Rioja. It's about 16,000 hectares out of the 66,000 of Rioja in total. Nearly half of those hectares are more than 30 years old, and at least 2,000 hectares, it says nearly, but it's actually more of 2,000 hectares are more than 70 years old. So Rioja is one of the greatest reservoirs of old wines in Spain, and very few people are talking about it, and we think that has to change. This is a typical vineyard. This is called the Cofrades vineyard, for instance, planted in 1945. Our average size of vineyard is 0.3 hectares, and the average age is 50 years. But with many vineyards from the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, and the youngest ones are from the 1980s, beginning of the 1980s. What is great about this area in Spain in general is that we didn't really get greenhouses and like clones available until the early 80s. So any vineyard planted before, say, 82, 83, you have a certain nearly a guarantee that it's a Selección Masal selection. So this would be a typical vineyard of our 300 parcels that we have, called Campos Salvos, planted in 45 in the village of Leza, 0.23 hectares. And if you go to the registry, I think Viviana managed the registries. In Spain, there's similar stories. The registries were made in the 60s, in the 70s, and somebody asked the guys, the viticulturists, hey, what do you have? And the answer was, well, my grandparent planted Tempranillo. But it's actually not true. Normally, you have 90% Tempranillo, genetically diverse Tempranillo, and a whole bunch of other varieties interplanted. And that's actually one of the most fascinating aspects of the old vines, and what makes them a really interesting heritage beyond the age itself, which is, of course, also very important. And then obviously just a few pictures. This is obviously handpicked. You see the diversity of even co-planted whites and reds, very typical. Then they get selected, very easy fermentations. And then we make wines, not in the classical oxidative aging style, but deciding freely about vessel, time, size, in order to make wines that express their place more and not less. And at the end of the day, suggesting a very classical terroir-driven architecture, product architecture, with a single vineyard at the top, village wines as a second level, and then regional wines with a strong regional personality below. And that's basically it.
Thanks, Andreas. Yeah, thank you for that presentation. It's really interesting to hear about Rioja, kind of that's historically been defined on its, how long it's been spent in oak, and that movement towards more kind of terroir-driven styles of wine, and I guess old vines can play a huge part in that, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely key. I mean, you have, there are at least 3 Riojas. You have what is very well known, say Rioja Alta, is very much the land of estates. So the average parcel in Rioja Alta is probably 7, 9, 11 hectares big. So that's not good or bad, but it's just a different philosophy. Then you have Rioja Oriental, now Oriental, which used to be Baja, where you have small parcels in the mountains, but in the valleys, you have quite massive plantations of 20, 30 hectares, mechanized, monoclonal, irrigated, to make like commercial Rioja. Our part of Rioja is the land of small parcels. So 0.3 is the average parcel size of the whole Rioja Alavesa. So you can't possibly approach a land that looks more like Burgundy or Champagne in its viticultural structure with the same viticultural, enological, or even commercial approach than you do in Rioja Alta. So that has to be discriminated. And our big fight is to communicate that, to get the personality into the glass, and to get wine experts to understand that diversity and treat different parts of Rioja differently.
Yeah, fascinating. Actually, we just had a question that you could take just now as well. Are they grafted or ungrafted, your vineyards?
They are all grafted. There's very little ungrafted vineyards in Rioja because the soils don't allow it. Actually, what is wrongly considered traditional Rioja in the sense of the oak-aged or oxidatively aged wine is really just one generation of Rioja that happened because of phylloxera and because of a demand existing in France, and it had to be satisfied. So the whole, in the best sense of the word, industrial generation of Rioja products was created to respond to the demand, to make a very reliable, recognizable wine of style. And that's the reason of the focus on oak aging and the classification of Crianza Reserva as if it was whiskey and not wine. It's the generations before made vigneron wines, really. So it's a question of getting back to a different tradition based on growers and those small parcels which always existed here.
Yeah, really interesting. So let's open the discussion up a little bit. We're going to try and cover as much ground as we can in the time that we've got. But one of the things, so you've already introduced the kind of history of your estates. One of the things I'm always curious about when we're talking about old vines is how they came to be old. And usually there's a story behind this, because in most vineyards around the world, the life cycle goes that you plant your vineyard and then it's productive for a number of decades. And then the story goes that it becomes, as yields drop, as the vines get older, it becomes commercially unviable and the vineyards get grubbed up and replanted. So I'm curious to know why that didn't happen in your vineyards. So I mean, Elodie, I noticed something in your presentation about planting mixed crops. So is there a story there at Plaimont?
Yes, every wine grower is a mixed farmer. So they have crops, so they have cow or ducks. So they are not dependent on the wine production, and it's why we have old vine, and also because Plaimont chose to preserve the old vine, and for this plot, the wine grower has a bonus,
Right.
financial bonus to preserve the vine, and it's a compensation for the decrease of the yield. And it was really important because the southwest of France and Saint-Mond, it's an unknown appellation, so we do not have a really important don't know, comment tu dis, value, an important value of the production. The price of the hectare is lower, so we need to yes, to make a bonus to preserve and keep this parcel.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And Viviana, what about you? What was the story in your vineyards? Was there a particular hero that's responsible for saving these vines, or was it just a happy accident?
Actually, both of them. In the first place, as actually like for Elodie's area, Aglianico del Butre is not so known and not so considered, and that's permitted for a long time that the old vines, even if they have a lower yield, were left to live their life, let's say, because there's not any urge to produce more. And then at some point, basically after phylloxera attacked north of Italy, south of Italy became more important, more interesting. So in the late 90s, in the mid 90s, there was more and more interest in production. But the plots in the top part of the volcano where we are very uncomfortable, normally quite steep and separate between them. So the production was more concentrated at the bottom of the volcanic area, where there is like a wide flat lands. And this was the first part of the help to be not considered. And then the lucky thing was that when the property is being bought by the actual owner, Antonio Capaldo, Elodie di San Gregorio, they arrived here with a high, clear idea of what the value of the area is. And at that time, and still now, the agronomy was Pier Paolo Sirk from the pruning guys and Friuli, the pruning master school. And as soon as he spotted this vineyard, they both decided to keep it and preserve it and make it kind of a flagship of what should be considered as the history of this territory. So it was like a combination of moments with no celebrity in between.
Yeah. And what was the sort of like in your local region? Because Andreas was saying, I forget the statistic you said, Andreas, but something about, was it 30% of vineyards in Rioja are over, I can't remember exactly what you said, but anyway, significant proportion of the vines in Rioja and your part of Rioja are pretty old. What's your neighbors look like, Viviana? Are you guys quite unusual to have these stocks of old vines in this part of Italy, or are there quite a few vineyards like this around?
Well, I'd say that in the uncomfortable area, it's still quite frequent to find old vine. And especially in this area, Basilicata, I don't know, I say it for everybody, is kind of at the very end of the Italian boot, between the tip and the heel. So like, it's exactly what people call the middle of nowhere. So there are old vineyards, but even here, more and more, obviously, there is a production, if day by day, more interested in the quantity. So is obviously natural that that they disappeared, especially because it's not a very developed area. So there is not yet the value of this kind of rich monument that can be an old vine.
Interesting, thank you. We had actually another old vine session a few months ago from Sarah, who you guys will know, I wanted to, in this session, to see if we could kind of get under the skin. So we covered a lot of the kind of the practical parts of sort of textbook knowledge, if you like, around old vines in that seminar. In this one, I wanted to see if we get under the skin of what it's actually like to curate these vineyards, or to look after these vineyards from a kind of a viticultural point of view. So I was curious to know, like, what the approach to viticulture is and how it differs from a more conventional vineyard. So for example, Andreas, you were mentioning that your vineyard is co-planted, right? So in a modern vineyard, you'd have your block of Cabernet Sauvignon and your block of Merlot, and it'll be nice and separated out. But in your vineyard, that's not the case at all. You've got one vine of Tempranillo and then one vine of Grenache, and must make life quite difficult.
And even more than that, it's the fragmentation. I don't know if you imagine 0.3 hectares, how much it's really small. So that's the average size of the parcels, and the topography is quite complex. So the reason wine has always been planted here is because those soils on the hillside of the Sierra Cantabria are perfect for wine and for not much else. So it has always been the place where the local people knew wine should stand. It's poor soil. It's naturally limiting in yield. So this is obviously worked by hand. You can't mechanize it. It's just not possible. They have to be worked by hand. They have to be picked by hand, treated by hand, and the average grower can maybe handle. If you push me 9 hectares, maybe 12. Like 2 people and 1 tractor can handle 7, 8, 9 hectares. And typically they would own 3 or 4 and then handle like the other small parcels of the wider extended family. So it's quite small and very much comes from that vigneron, what is called cosechero tradition, where you would grow the grapes, produce the wine for yourself, and then sell the rest to other wineries. The luck they have had here, to a certain extent, is they were planted after phylloxera, as I said, because phylloxera destroyed everything, and there's no soil where you can actually have pre-phylloxeric plants. And since then, the expansion of Rioja has been into less favorable areas, the valleys. So because of the understanding that these are the best places for grapes, they were preserved, but also because of the emotional value to the families. People know their grandfather or their grand-grand-grand or great-grandfather planted those vineyards, so they stick to them, even though they're not being paid enough. So the big problem here is, I mean, the average price for a kilo of grapes in the whole of Rioja has been hovering around 80 € per kilo for 20 years, and nothing has changed. It just, there's a bit of fluctuation depending on big or small harvests. So a good grower here would maybe get €1 if they were lucky and sold the grapes, but it's just not enough to make those vineyards viable. So it's more like an emotional kind of link and the hope that somebody would recognize it, and then finding someone who values it and to use it in house styles as the base for the higher quality ones. But we are very far away from making them economically viable. So we have one generation left, max maybe 20 years to make them, to save them actually.
Yeah, really interesting. I also, just while we're on this topic of kind of the challenges that you guys face that are unique to having these old vines, Elodie, I really wanted to ask about your wild vine vineyard, because you had a picture in your presentation that looked, I mean, quite unlike anything that I've ever seen before. Could you tell us about that vineyard and whether there are viticultural implications, or do you just let it do its thing and grow wild?
Yes, it's not really a vineyard. It's just a few specimen by few specimen in the forest or close to a river. It's a specimen we find in the nature, and it's not a culture. It's a Vitis sylvestris. Is the ancient variety of vines. So it's called the Lambrusque, and we have in all our territory around 20 specimens of white vines, and they grow close to a big tree to find light, and it's just my English is not really perfect, but it's abandoned space, not with the culture of the vines. Sorry.
Yeah, like a wild kind of untamed.
Yes, it's in the white space, yeah. Because it's need humidity and a preservation space. So we can find yes, in a wild forest or just close to a humidity space. So we have find specimens which are maybe 150 years old, and it grow up just with the tree. And if the tree is really old, the specimen have close to the same age of the tree.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you guys know.
It's a rare species, and it's really protected.
But you do, I mean, you do harvest the grapes and you do vinify.
No. It's not a hermaphrodite specimen. So it's you have a male specimen and also a female specimen. But the grapes are really acidic. You have a big tannin, and it's not really good. And the berries are really small, and it's awful. It's yes, the ancestral vines, and we selected the best specimen. It's yes, the material selection that the human made a few. Yes, to select just the specimen who have a big berry, and yes, it's the ancestral variety of vines.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit. I don't know if you guys know Nayan Gouda, who works in Bolivia. He's got makes a wine called Jardin Oculto, and it looks kind of similar. He just has the vines growing up trees and really, really old vines. It's a fascinating vineyard, but he does actually make something out of it. I haven't tried it, but
yes, we do a genetic analysis to confirm it's a true Lambrusque.
yeah.
Because
My final question.
you can find a genetic genetic transfer with genetic mixed with normal vines. So it's not a protected specimen. We need to find only Silvestris vines.
Yeah. Thank you. My final question on viticulture, because I want to move on to winemaking, some other stuff. But I was wondering about, about the yields in your vineyards, and so certainly those of you who have got kind of older vines with some younger parcels as well, and what the kind of differences in the yields is. Because Sarah, when she did her presentation earlier in the year, one of the most interesting things that she said was actually this thing that we learn when we do our wine studies is that as vines get older, the yields go down to a point where they're no longer commercially viable. And she kind of challenged that a little bit and said, actually, there's lots of research that suggests vines kind of find a balance as they get older. So what's your experience about yields in the vineyards? Are they really, really low for these old vines, or are they manageable?
Well,
I can start.
Yeah, Andreas, why don't you go?
No, actually, I would also challenge the idea a little bit. I mean, in Rioja, the yields are legally limited to, depending on the year, around 6,000 kilos, which doesn't mean that it's always respected. So actually, as a side note, growers who have really old vines can actually sell paper, as I'm sure happens in Italy too, in other Mediterranean places. So people just take over the excess or the lack of the gap in production, and you can actually market that in order to exceed the maximum production in other parts of the areas. That's very typical in everywhere. But even an old vineyard, old in our standards, say 60, 70, 80 years, can be perfectly balanced and produce, say, 4,000, 4,500 kilos per hectare, and that's a perfect balance. Actually, lower than that is not necessarily better in a sunny climate. You have the freshest and most defined and precise wines in the right kind of way. And if the vineyard is healthy and well maintained, it can keep at that yield mainly forever or for a very long time. Of course, when we go into really old vineyards, I say 1920s or so, you might have some places where you have like dying plants, and then like really struggling vineyards, or you go down to 2,000 kilos or even less. But it's not necessarily better. The problem with the idea is that once the yield goes down, you have to replace it. Comes from a market price. It assumes that you produce commodity grapes to hit a certain market price. I would claim that if you have good old vineyards, there can be bad ones, but the good ones produce so much quality and so much also potential that even if you blend them, they actually pay for their worth easily. You can really improve nearly any wine by just adding 10, 15, 20% of juice from some really beautiful old vineyards. And that's one of the reasons the oldest wines in Rioja have survived, because big commercial wineries are aware of the bettering properties of those wines.
Yeah. And Viviana, have you found the same? Because you've got the Storico wine, which is from your super old Aglianico vines, but I guess your other labels are probably younger vines. I mean, do you find the same sort of thing? Do you notice a big difference in yield?
Yes, before we started to do this separate bottling, Storico was used for our top wines, and actually it was an amazing touch. So I agree with Andreas about that kind of value that was had. We made the choice to bottle it single vineyard, this one, and also the other old vine, which is a 40+ years old vine. This other one, which is 40, is let's say that has a production which is good enough compared to the possibility of the denomination. We are allowed to produce 80 quintals, which is like probably the 8,000 kilos Andreas was mentioning as well. And we are about the 45 per, 4,500 kilos per hectare. which is a very low yield, but bearable, reasonable, and it has a sense compared to the value of the wine. Where the historical is producing in a good vintage about 1,200 kilos, which is it makes it kind of obestic or just a matter of passion and really history of the territory. And the Aglianico is totally. I remember a wine I tasted in south of France that was made by a producer that has the same kind of yields, and he called it irraisonnable, like it's not reasonable. The historical is this way: there is not a sense if you look at the comparison between the money you spend and the production and what you can make out of these vineyards. But it definitely, this is not the vineyard where we look at the yields, obviously. But yes, I confirm for us it's really extremely, incredibly low.
Moving on to the
Yes.
cellar then. I wanted to, because I know that we're sort of a little bit pushed for time, so I wanted to move on to winemaking stuff, and I was curious to know whether or not there's a difference in the winemaking process or in the cellar about how you treat these grapes in any, or is it just essentially you're just following a standard kind of winemaking procedures? Or, and Elodie, is there anything that you do that's kind of unique with your older parcels?
For example, for the prephyloxeric vines, vinification is really adapted to the parcel and case by case. So we need to extract just a few tannins. So we do not extract too many during the fermentation. We do just a little maceration, and we need to preserve the aromatic because the tannins are really fine. The fineness of the aromatic is most important on prephyloxeric vines, and the tannins are also rounder, so we need to preserve a maximum of yes, aromatic and a soft structure. So we just do a few extraction on the first day of the fermentation, but everything is everything need to be preserved on the aromatic and the tannin. So we do need too much extraction, less than the other vine, for example. And
Right,
it's really curious because the millésime effect is less important on prephyloxeric vines because they have really, really deep roots, and also the alcohol is lower. It's really regular. Even if you have a hot millésime or a cold millésime, the alcohol is around 13, but it's not the really, yes, it's really regular for the aromatic or the quality.
Really interesting.
Every millésime is really nice in the freeze.
Yeah. I mean, I'm jumping ahead. I was going to try and cover this later on, but when, you know, when we think of the times that we live in and, you know, the turbulence of climate change and etc., like that must be a kind of like a real boon for old vines, right? Is their ability to keep those alcohol levels low. And I mean, can you speak on that?
We find the same in Rioja. It's quite striking, actually. Say a really extreme year for us, like 22. So the villages and the vineyards which are closer to the Ebro River suffered much more. But the oldest vines up in, say, Leza, Samaniego, which are really high and really, really old, it's actually amazing how little they have been impressed by those extreme years. It seems like they have seen it all. So it's a bit like, I think it's a bit like a human. They really have like, I mean, everybody talks about resiliency. It's like a very fashionable word right now, but it's totally true. They just are extremely stable. And I agree with Elodie in terms of the aromatic profile. There's just more depth. There are layers of primary fruit that have to be preserved. So we believe very much in clarity in the wines and precision, and we think that terroir is expressed by fruit and primary fruit, and that depth of fruit you have to preserve it in winemaking. So it has to be quite precise and try not to cover it up. And then again, texture, and I also agree there, it's really interesting. The tannin quality is completely stunning. You have such great tannins in the skins, you don't need any oak. So it's actually, from a Rioja point of view, where everything has been so based on oak aging, it makes sense if you have like simple fruit, say in Rioja Oriental, a little bit well-made, strawberry fruit, then you better give the wine some oxidative aging to get some personality to the winemaking. If you have top quality fruit, you don't need that because you have the really fresh acidity, you have the really deep fruit, and you have that fantastic tannin texture that actually builds the backbone to those wines, and they age amazingly for years and years without any need of oak. So that would be my answer to your question. We barely use any oak or only big oak on them because they don't need it.
So you've completely stepped out of the Crianza Reserva Gran Reserva classification. You don't use them at all?
We don't use them at all because it's just a recipe, and we want to have the freedom of using how we age the wines depending on vintage, depending on parcel. So we use mainly big oak, concrete. So we're not making young wines. I mean, the wines need time and space to develop, but we don't want to define them through the aging.
Yeah, that's really, and so I guess in the sort of fight against climate change, those things coupled together with that, deep roots and availability with water, stands in quite good stead as the climates in your regions are changing compared to younger vineyards that are going to be much more fluctuating.
It's not so much. I mean, I think we have to challenge the idea that roots get deeper just because the vineyards are old. That's not necessarily true, because vineyards grow roots when they need to. So depending on water availability. So we have found that root systems develop even in old vines when you change viticulture to more sustainable viticulture and get life back into the soils. You can actually get root systems to develop again and more. So it's not a question of size, but of resilience of the root system and being able to develop even at a high age. But that's just maybe as an aside.
So thinking ahead then to the future of these vineyards, I wanted to ask all of you kind of why you feel it's important that these old vineyards are preserved and what they add that's beyond just the kind of, yields and the commercial aspects. What's the kind of like wider social significance of your vineyards, and why is it important that they are preserved? Why is it important to you that they're preserved? So Viviana, maybe I could ask you that first.
I think first of all, as usual, it's very important to look backwards to understand where we are and where we want to go. And vineyards are very clearly talking about that. And specifically, my experience with the old vines is that they are more resistant, and they are, as my colleague said before, they're very consistent, very stable to disease, to climate, and that is a lesson we should learn and make advantage out of it and transfer it in our work in all the vineyards. Personally, my graduation starts from history, so obviously my passion is also connected to the idea that I work in caves that have been used for winemaking since the 6th centuries, and the vineyards are here in this area since 1,000 years. So I do obviously project my feelings to this idea of history also on this heritage we have. And actually heritage, I think, is a key word, because it's also the legacy we received and we passed on. And obviously it doesn't involve only vineyards, but in viticulture especially is a way to get through all the troubles we're gonna have now with climate. For example, we use the genetic material of the phylloxera vine for the new plants of all the vineyards. And in this vineyard, we keep using what is called a cattail. I don't actually know the word in English. Yeah, it was in the picture. And I think this is in this moment, what I feel is that this is our work, let's say, to preserve, to be guardian, and to communicate what there is. And unfortunately, I don't know. I talk for myself. In these areas, it's still very difficult. Actually, the award I got this year from Old Vine Conference has been, to me, a great experience, especially because it's like a light that focus on south of Italy viticulture, which is really enhancing a value that we have and not considering because it's there. So I think the future of this culture should be more and more evident. The more we talk about it, the more that I look at this moment, and I think about 100 people listening to a conference about old wine. And to me, in this little corner of Italy, is amazing, this interest, and that is what can save the vineyards, the interest of people and talking about them.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes so much more than just agriculture, doesn't it? When you're kind of the guardians or the curators of a piece of living history, which I think speaks to the soul of a lot of people. Elodie, can I put the same question to you? What's the kind of like wider cultural
yes, because it's also ampelographic value, because we have, for example, the prephyloxeric plot has 21 different variety inside. So it selects only the red one for the vinification, of course. But we find some unknown grape variety named by the name of the wine grower. So you have a Pet Bernard grape variety or a Dubosk grape variety, and some of them are really interesting because they are less alcohol or more acidity. So it's a really all the old vine, when you are in a massal selection or prephyloxeric vine, so you have a huge diversity, genetic diversity. So you can find grape variety, they are really interesting in the context of climate changing. So it's why we planted a conservatory with 40 different variety founded in these old vines, and some of them are reintroduced in our appellation, like the Tardif or the Mansa Noir. It was unknown or abandoned grape varieties, but now they are really interesting because they have less degree and softer tannin. So we redevelop some variety we find in this old vine. So it's really precious to preserve it and because it's really rich and the value it's cultural.
Yeah. I mean, that's fascinating. Yeah, thank you. And then just to round things off, perhaps Andreas, I could ask you a slightly different question, which is if we all agree that it's really important that we preserve these old vines, what's the best way to do it?
I would say our job, my colleagues, as winemakers, is to get that personality into the glass. So those old wines have a strong capacity to make wines which are unique, and it really shows. So I think if you focus really on that personality and can then get it across, then we can actually justify it. We are not asking for pity that we have to save those. I mean, they're beautiful ecosystems and they deserve to be protected, but it's all very abstract if you don't get it into the glass. But the capacity of making wines which have a cultural element to it, which really tell you where they are from, is unique. It's actually amazing. Added with what Elodie was saying about the genetic variety. I mean, in a typical of our parcels, we have 11, 12 varieties, and there are always 3, 4, 5 plants that have no match in the database. So they're unknown, even though they are planted in the 1920s or 1930s, and they're not even that old. So in that context, talking about, say, PVs, which are now very much in fashion, from our perspective, it's ridiculous. I mean, we have all those reservoirs there, which we don't yet understand. So it's really a question of making great wine and using that making great wines to give them a reason to exist. So I think it's our job is to give them a reason to exist, and you guys as communicators and as professionals in the market have to get it across and explain why. Not so much how and what has happened, but more why.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very, very well-made argument. So we've had, I mean, we could speak for, I feel like, the next few hours on this, but I wanted to open this up to questions that we've had submitted by some of the people watching. So we'll get through as many of these as we can. I'll just kind of look for some of the ones that are most relevant to all of you, and then you can just take your pick if you want to chip in with an answer. So William was wondering whether or not there are any efforts to standardize how many years are required to make the claim of old vines.
There's some in Rioja. It used to be 40 years, and it's getting increased little by little now. And I think it will be 50 years in 5 years or something like that. So it's more or less an arbitrary number, but I think I can live with 50. I'm happy with 50 years.
Yes, yeah, 52 I said, but it's really complicated because you can old vine not a definition. So you can call the old vine a 30 years old vines. So us in Plaimont, yes, I agree with Andreas. We called every vine planted before 50 years ago, it's old vines to 150 years. But yes, during 50 years, you can have a regularity, and I think you need to have also a massal selection, because I think our clonal selection would be different in the future, because we have more wood disease and it's different. So I think the ancient old vine would be different than the future old vines. I don't know if you understand, but
yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, that does make sense. Toril was asking quite an interesting question. Well, I think interesting. It says, when planting a new vineyard today, are there any lessons that can be learned from the old vines and the way that they used to be planted and the way that they're used? Anybody want to take that one?
Great question. We could talk hours about that. I mean, for starters, I mean, we don't plant any new wines in Rioja because we are so busy with the old vines that we have to handle. But we handle another vineyard in Cuenca in Castile. So there we are doing multi-clonal plantations. So we make selections, we interplant. And we actually are much slower planting. We actually try to make wines that can get 200 years old. Because what we are saying is that the vineyards that are 40 years old are dying, or 30 years, because it was the wrong clone. They were planted with the wrong idea, with the wrong philosophy. You can plant a new vineyard, which will age greatly. I think we can now. We have the knowledge now. So there are many aspects of that. I mean, we could talk for hours, I guess.
Yes. Anybody else want to chip in on that one, or shall I move on to another one?
Yes, it's really complicated. And the old vine are marcoté. I don't know the definition, translation in English, because you need to preserve the massal selection. You can plant a clone selection in your old vine. So we made a marcotage, so it's a long work to replant the vine who are dead in the plot. So it's really complicated, and you need more manual work. You need to be really carefully when you do everything you do to develop the vine. So it's a complicated question. And it depends the gravity or the vigor of the plant. So you need to be really more adapted with this vine than the other, I think.
Yeah. We've had another question about the role of marketers and distributors. So what role do you see marketers and distributors playing in relaying the uniqueness of these vines to buyers? I mean, is that something that you think about, or is that really kind of someone else's department and you just focus on making it? What do you think about that?
Happy to take. I mean, I think about this my whole day. Because I mean, our work is probably to find the right partners to convey the message, and we are super successful when we manage to do that. Every time we get our partners to send their sales people here and they see it and they say, wow, we have been 20 times to Rioja. All we had seen is barrels and now we understand. And then suddenly it really works well. So you have to make that effort of showing it. So I think you need, I think it depends on what kind of distributor you are. If you have a distributor who just respond to a commodity market, that's fine, but then that's one way of doing it. If you are a distributor or a retailer or a restaurant that tries to add value through wine, which is also interesting, then you need to have a reason why you have selected the product. And then is when we come in, because we actually offer something. Sometimes we have like a partner, in my case, Rioja, somebody has 6 Riojas already on their list, in their portfolio. So the way of selling more Rioja is actually to drop 2 or 3 of those that all taste the same, stick with the good ones, and then add a couple of really interesting ones. And you end up selling more Rioja in total across 4 wineries than you sold before across 6. So I think it's a question of understanding the economic value of interesting wines. And if we manage that, we also sell more wine to the final consumer. We can't possibly wait for a final consumer to ask for the kind of wines I think the 3 of us are making. I mean, nobody walks into a restaurant and asks for it. So we're in the business of making something which has no demand, but people want it once they know it exists. So we very much need the help of the channel, and no doubt.
Yeah,
it's an experience wine. You need to have the story around the plot to explain the difference and the value of the plot.
Yeah, and it makes such a great story, doesn't it, for a potential consumer? I mean, it's a very seductive idea of these old vines. So there's definitely
especially if the liquid
story there.
If the liquid really follows through, and if you listen to the story and then you taste the wine and it's really there, then it's great. Then it works. Right? It's not empty marketing. It's not some kind of gimmicky idea. It's not just, oh, these wines are old. No, the wines really have an extra energy and extra depth, or all these kind of things. Oh, I think we lost Viviana.
Viviana.
Viviana, yeah. We have gone past the hour, so I'm not sure. She maybe had to be somewhere. But let's end, because I know some people have to get off. Let's end just with 2 questions actually from Rowena. So Rowena was asking whether or not old vines need special or different treatments compared with the younger vines in the vineyards. And then she also wants to know whether or not any of you will be attending the Old Vine Conference in London on the 19th of June, and whether she might see you. So should we take the second question first? Are either of you going to be at the OVC in London?
Elodie, go ahead.
No, it's okay. We will be on the conference Old Vine. Not me, but a colleague.
Yeah, me the same. My colleague Alba, who's my assistant, she will be there showing the wines. I can't, unfortunately, because I'm traveling somewhere else. But yeah, there's Viviana back.
Ah, Viviana's back. And then, the final question then, just let me put this to you, the viticulture one. So do the old vines need any special or different treatments compared with younger vines in the vineyards? And Viviana, just in case you did want to take that, you're currently muted, so we wouldn't be able to hear you. But yeah, anybody can chip in with that one.
I don't know. We need to adapt the manual work to each vines, but I think we do the same treatment than the other to respect it. And there is more manual work in this old vine. It's you can do a mechanical harvest, of course. So you need to do more mechanical and more manual work, and it's all the vines are tortuous. So you need to be really careful when you pass a machine inside. So yes, and it's a bit different, but the main conduit is the same for us. My knowledge.
It depends so much on the vineyard itself, and it's really hard to generalize. Actually, a really healthy, balanced old vineyard can sometimes need less. because it's so healthy and it really works and it goes nearly alone. But then it's true, it needs more manual work. I mean, it depends on how you. We do double pruning, for instance, if you have frost risk, so you have to prune twice. So there's a lot of extra, also because they tend to be the best vineyards, so you treat them best. But it's not so much. I wouldn't say that the cost effect of more work in the vineyard is that important for the final price. Talking about fine wine. Once you get over a certain, I mean, we always talk about the cost, but I mean, the grapes are not that higher percentage of the final bottle of wine once you get into territory of, say, 20 pounds plus or $30. So we should be able to spend an extra euro per kilo of grapes, for instance. It should really be possible if the quality is there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, look, I feel a little bit sad because I kind of want to keep chatting to you three because it's been such an interesting conversation. But I know some people will have to get off, and so I'm going to wrap up things there. But thank you so much to all three of you for joining us and sharing your expertise and your experiences in farming these amazing vineyards that you have. Thank you also to all of you who are joining us from home. We'll hope to see you back next week for another session. But in the meantime, it's been an absolute pleasure. Huge thanks to all of you, and I will let you get on with the rest of your days or the rest of your evenings, depending on where you're joining us from. So Elodie, Viviana, and Andreas, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, and I will sign the call off for now. So bye-bye, everybody.
Thank
Nice to
you.
meet you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.